Good morning. Please join us as we sing together.
Good morning, and welcome to worship at First Unitarian Church of Portland. We are a multi-generational community, and our mission is to nurture the individual spirit and together live into beloved community. And we're so glad you're here with us in the sanctuary and joining us online. I have several announcements to share. This weekend is the beginning of Oregon spring break, and there are no learning community classes today or next Sunday. So children are always welcome here in the sanctuary, and childcare is always available for children 3 and under over in our Buchanan building. And 2 weeks from today is Easter Sunday, and we'll have a lot going on at church, including an Easter egg hunt. So we hope that you will join us. Unfortunately, our usual tea time gathering for trans and non-binary congregants is canceled today because the facilitator is not well. And so we're sending healing wishes to Morgan, and please look at the calendar and announcements. I'm sure that it will be happening again once Morgan is well. And today in church we have special visitors from Ukraine, the president and vice president of thyself Ukraine, a professional organization that advances the teaching of English. And after the service, you can greet Olena and Marina during social hour down in Fuller Hall. And then at 12:30, our Peace Action Group will host a presentation in the Elliott Chapel called Life and Learning in Ukraine During Wartime, when our guests will share about their experiences living and working in Ukraine during this last year of war. And following the presentation, you're also invited to join for a light lunch at 1:30 in Daisy Bingham to break bread with our guests. So welcome, guests. Are they in here right now? Okay, great. Yeah. Oh, there they are. Tomorrow evening, March 27th at 6:30, our Immigrant Justice Action Group will host an online workshop to learn about the Asylum Seeker Project in Oregon. The project coordinator will speak to the current reality of asylum seekers in Oregon, the challenges they face, and some possible actions to support this group of immigrants. On Tuesday, March 28th at 7 p.m., also on Zoom, our Advancing Racial Justice Action Group will show a TED Talk by Mark Charles, Navajo writer, scholar, and speaker. Charles's talk is called We the People, the 3 most misunderstood words in US history, about the doctrine of discovery. Following the screening, there will be a guided discussion. And on Wednesday, March 29th at 6:30 p.m. in Elliott Chapel, the Economic Justice Action Group hosts an evening with esteemed authors Steve Early and Suzanne Gordon. They will discuss their latest book that sheds lights on care for our veterans and the fight against veterans' healthcare privatization. So please see our e-news or church website for more information about these events, social justice action items, and all church offerings. So in a moment, we're going to greet our neighbors, and I just want to remind the folks online that if you have access to the chat, you can use the chat to greet one another there, and we'll now say hello to each other here. Reverend Alison will light our chalice here in the sanctuary.
We are
Unitarian Universalists. We light this chalice in faith, in hope, and in love.
I decided to take a stand, not knowing I'd lose my best friend. but I'd rather be right than in hell to lift up my eyes. Stand, all of God's children just stand. Yeah, tell somebody you stand. Yes, Lord, stand. Stand for holiness, stand for righteousness. Among those who stand. When friends are gone, stand. When you're all alone, and believe in time of will. I've decided to take a stand. At believing I'd lose some of my best friends, but I'd rather be right than in hell to lift up my eyes. Tell somebody, say stand. All of God's children say stand. Ooh, you stand. Who stand for holiness? Stand for righteousness, and he shall stand. Stand when you're all alone in time of will. Stand. Stand. Counted among those. Stand. Stand. In time of will. Oh, stand. Among those. Yeah, stand. Stand. Believe in time of will. Stand. Righteousness among those. Stand. Stand. Time of will. In time of will. People say that, somebody help me out now. You're gonna do it. Do it now. You're gonna 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 do it now. Say, you stand.
I'm so glad that we rose up for that song. I hope that you rose up at home in body or in spirit. It reminds me of something that gets said, that Jews are sometimes called the chosen people, and Unitarian Universalists are sometimes called the frozen people. Let us do everything we can to counter that reputation. So, if you feel moved to move, then do so, please. Our opening words come from that font of inspiration and wisdom, our gray hymnal, and there are other fonts of inspiration as well. These words are anonymous. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Let us rise in body or spirit and move with the next song, There is Love. Our responsive reading is by Sarah Moores Campbell. Give us the spirit of the child. Give us the spirit of the child. Give us the child who lives within. The child who trusts. The child who imagines. The child who sings. The child who receives without reservation, the child who gives without judgment. Give us a child's eyes that we may receive the beauty and freshness of this day like a sunrise. Give us a child's ears that we may hear the music of mythical times. Give us a child's heart that we may be filled with wonder and delight. Give us a child's faith that we may be cured of our cynicism. Give us the spirit of the child who is not afraid to need, who is not afraid to love. And now let us join in our doxology.
Oh
every Sunday we share our offering with an organization whose mission aligns with our own. And for this church year, we are focusing on youth leadership organizations. For March, Women's History Month, we dedicate our offering to Girls, Inc. They serve youth ages 6 to 18 across Portland, Seattle, and Southwest Washington. Girls are supported to value their whole selves, discover and develop their inherent strengths, and receive the support they need to navigate challenges. Their leadership council for 8 to 12 graders is a space to engage in civic dialogue with peers about critical issues, meet local leaders, and develop advocacy skills such as public speaking and research. And for those of you here in the sanctuary, our ushers will be coming through with a basket if you are giving by way of cash or check. There's also a QR code on the yellow cards in the seat back in front of you if you'd like to give online. And those joining our live stream, you can click the donate button on Boxcast or use the QR code that will soon appear on the screen. Thank you for your generosity that helps sustain the ministry of this church. We make space each week in our service to name the concerns of our community life. So pastoral support happens through our ministers and our lay ministers. If you're here in person, you can light a candle in one of our side galleries and write down your prayer intention. You can also send an intention for prayer to prayer@firstunitarianportland.org. Longtime member Deanne Ader died on March 18th at the age of 81 after taking a bad fall at home. Deanne and her husband of 61 years, Jonathan, raised 7 children. In the words of her family, she was a powerful force in our community and touched many lives with her compassion, fierce love, and strong moral compass, especially advocating for children and for people living with mental illness. We hold Jonathan and his family at this time of loss. Member Donald Deaton died on March 18th at the age of 87. His daughter, Catherine Daly Deaton, shared, "My dad and family attended First Church my whole life, since my parents moved to Portland in the late 70s. We shared some of my favorite memories sitting up in the front pews together, listening to sermons and sharing a love of the magical, spiritual unknown. It is hard to imagine a world that he does not inhabit and brighten with all of his positive energy and gift of storytelling." We hold Catherine, her sister Yvette, and their mother Rosemary at this time. Portland's beloved drag queen Darcelle died on Thursday, March 23rd at the age of 92. Darcelle was the stage name of Walter Cole, who grew up in Portland and performed as Darcelle since 1967 when he opened the cabaret venue of the same name. Darcelle was a groundbreaker of gender expression, a champion of LGBTQ rights, and a creator of joy. We hold Darcelle's loved ones and all whom she touched in our hearts. This Friday, March 31st, is the Trans Day of Visibility, dedicated to celebrating transgender people, honoring their contributions to society, and raising awareness of discrimination. We recognize the courage of our siblings who are transgender, non-binary, or embrace identities outside gender boxes to deeply listen to the truth and wisdom that comes from within in order to live authentic lives. We also recognize that it is our transgender siblings whose lives, whose bodies, are being used as pawns to advance a political agenda that opposes beloved community and human dignity. To all our members, friends, and siblings of all ages who are transgender, non-binary, or gender expansive, we see you, we love you, we celebrate you, and we are with you. Amen. Amen. Will you join me in a spirit of prayer? And let's begin by each of us settling into our own bodies. Please draw attention to your breath and notice the natural rise and fall of your heart and the stillness present within the constant movement. Spirit of life, we are here, drawn together in our precious community to pause, to listen, to be comforted, and to be inspired. As we breathe together, let us feel the movement of life force within us and among us. Spirit of comfort and compassion, help us to hold ourselves and one another with care and tenderness in our times of grief, times of challenge and exhaustion, times of fear and despair. For those among us who are facing loss, we hold you with love. You are not alone. You are a precious part of our web of life. A spirit of renewal, as the spring breaks through the lingering cold, remind us that the nature of life is change, that new life is constantly emerging even in the midst of difficult conditions. Help us to observe the beauty and the strength of new life as it bursts forth. Spirit of courage, be with us to lift our voices when we see injustice. Help us to challenge patterns in ourselves and in our communities that maintain systems of exclusion, of domination, of violence, of war. Spirit of peace, help us to see one another's humanity and inherent worth and dignity. Be with us as we courageously say no to hate, to war, and instead forge pathways of understanding, of mutual care, and of surviving and thriving. Spirit of love and transformation, inspire us to plant and nourish seeds for the change we wish to cultivate in ourselves and in our world. We give thanks for this pause, for this community, for the preciousness of being embodied on this miraculous earth. And may we live this day and every day with gratitude. Amen. Let us take a few moments of silent meditation. Please remain seated as we sing Find a Stillness. Our reading this morning is Going to the Brook to Be by Madeleine L'Engle. The path becomes full of tussocks and hummocks. My legs are etched by the thorns of blackberry brambles and wild roses. Earlier this summer, the laurel burst from snow into fire, and a few weeks later we found a field of sweet wild strawberries. And then there are blueberry bushes. Not very many, but a few taller than I am, and to me, infinitely beautiful. I go to the brook because I get out of being, out of the essential. So I'm not like the bush then. I put all my prickliness, selfishness, internedness into my isness. We all tend to, and when we burn, this part of us is consumed. When I go past the tallest blueberry bush where my twine is tied to one of the branches, I think that the part of us that has to be burned away is something like the dead wood on the bush. It has to go, to be burned in the terrible fire of reality until there is nothing left but our ontological selves, what we are meant to be. I go to the brook and my tensions and frustrations are lost as I spend a happy hour sitting right in the water and trying to clear it of the clogging debris left by a fallen tree.
The next song the choir will sing is drawn from the wisdom of two stories, and maybe more. Some of you remember the story of David and Goliath. Some of you remember the story of the wall of Jericho, both systems of oppression that came down through lots of good intention, lots of good action. This story reminds us that any system of oppression, whether out in the world or even in our own living, in the institutions that we care deeply about, can tumble and fall. This is Giants.
Giants, to the The story I'm going to open with comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, just a few verses. The New Revised Standard Version. One of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, he asked him, "Which commandment is the first of all?" Jesus answered, "The first is, 'Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." We often reduce this second commandment to love your neighbor. While this is essential, the reference point that we are to use as to how well we love our neighbor is how well we love ourselves. Love your neighbor as yourself. Self-love is the measure for our ability to love another person. And yet, there are times we may struggle to care for ourselves and find it easier to care for others. I think of this time of the pandemic of these last 3 years. I think about the healthcare workers and the teachers and the parents who were on the front lines, the caregivers of all kinds, the clergy and the lay ministers and our caring volunteers, not only in the pandemic, but in this time of emerging. When your professional role or your family role is to center the well-being of others, there may be times when you lose your balance. As the airline staff remind us at the beginning of every flight, should there be a crisis, don't forget to put your oxygen mask on first before helping your neighbor with theirs, even if that neighbor is your child. Self-care is the source of care for neighbor, stranger, for all of humanity and all living beings on earth. If you have forgotten to take the time to breathe, to sit in a babbling brook for an hour, to care for and love you while also trying to care for and love others, then I invite you, turn that second commandment around. Love yourself as you would your neighbor. Embedded in the first two commandments are three important relationships, and all three are necessary to leading a meaningful and sustainable life. Love what is holy, love what is human, and don't forget to love the human that is you. This sermon is about that last relationship, about how compassionate, just, and loving you are to yourself. These last years of the pandemic have taught us so many things about ourselves and our society. It has been an emotionally, spiritually, and physically taxing time for many, and for some, the balance of personal health and care in all dimensions is off kilter. There are a number of manifestations of this truth. Mental health challenges and substance use rose during the pandemic, and it is going down somewhat in 2023, but it is still very high. And here is one statistic from this year that might catch our attention. In the beginning of 2023, 50% of young adults ages 18 to 24 report symptoms of anxiety and depression. Psychologist practices and liquor stores have never been busier. The Great Resignation in 2021 and 2022, especially among the helping professions, the COVID-19, similar to the freshman 15, the pounds that some, I certainly, have gained during the pandemic. As we enter 2023, exhaustion and burnout are the new catchphrase, the great post-pandemic burnout. It turns out that in 2023, exhaustion for some is as high as it was at the height of the pandemic. As things change and change again, some have grown tired. Many of you have shared with me how much you appreciated the ways that our church connected with you throughout the pandemic. I have heard from so many about the phone calls and online worship, as well as how much you also missed the ability to connect through more in-person gatherings outside of worship. I do believe that the offerings for our upcoming auction and a new group, just one example, of people who've moved to Portland to be with children and grandchildren are just two examples of the expanding opportunities on the horizon. This is a time of change, of re-examining, of continuing with the new things we learned to do, and of getting back to some of the old traditions that served us, and of learning how to do yet new things again. It's also a time on reflecting what did work well in terms of self-care and community care, and what hasn't worked well for us. May we learn about our individual and collective needs from this fertile time and not just hurriedly rush from here to get back to wherever there is without growth. The change that is possible in this time of continuing emergence. Hello to those of you who are back in person for the first time this week. Each week I greet someone or people like that. The separation taught us how to do some things better than before. We are more accessible. You with disabilities or experiencing an illness or who have work constraints in our congregation and all across the country share that this has been a time of greater connection in terms of the spiritual community that our congregation has to offer. Hello to the folks online. We're so glad you're here. We're never closing the online door. But for some, this has been a time of greater disconnection. May we learn and change and grow into a home with so many windows and doors and slides that open to allow people to join us in ways that are nourishing to you and to them. For all of us, we may have had recent experiences of quite a bit of time with ourselves alone or with a smaller pod. How was that time for you? Or are you still practicing it? Has it been an opportunity for you to get to know yourself better, or again at this age and stage? Or if you found the pandemic to be busier than life before, with nary a moment to yourself, maybe then as we emerge, you might figure out how to find time for you, a time of solitude, or even presence to that smaller pod as a regenerative tool. I knew I had the balance off during the pandemic when my child looked at me and said, "Mommy, we spend all this time together because of the pandemic, but we're always in separate rooms." He was in his school, my husband was teaching in his school, and I was running church from another room. Let us learn from this time. To love ourselves fully, we have to know ourselves fully, our gifts and our flaws, our joy and our pain, our beauty and the things we may not find so beautiful, our longing, our fear, our strength, our frailty. The task of knowing ourself rather than the projection of ourself is not as easy as it might seem. That powerful projection of who we think we are or who we hear we are is created by the filter of what we have come to believe about ourselves based on our family of origin, maybe, our friends, or the dominant culture we live in, our assessment of what media and society are telling us to be, and our sense of ourselves in the interactions of working and learning, socializing, or just moving in this world. And whether or not the current opportunities draw out the best in us or those with whom we come into contact. The powerful projection and perception of who we are is often not the same as who we are in the truest parts of our heart and soul and who we long to become. With Trans Day of Visibility coming up on Friday, I think about all the anti-trans legislation that has been on the rise throughout this pandemic and throughout this year, and how trans and non-binary folks in far too many spaces in our country have to encounter people's projections and unjust legislation about who they are and where they belong while they are engaged in the most ordinary of every tasks for each and every one of us, using a restroom at school or at work or in a restaurant or in an airport or any public space. You are loved. You are holy. You are capable of remembering that those voices you encounter that tell you you don't belong are just plain wrong. Part of spiritual maturity is about gaining clarity about the difference between the projections of others, the perceptions this creates, and what is real for us and what matters deeply to us, and acting accordingly in the world. It sounds so simple, the three things I said at the beginning: love what is holy, the first commandment, and the second, love what is human, love what is you. But many of us do carry voices inside our head that champion those projections and perceptions, which at times could create such a busyness and commotion in our own heads that rivals the busyness and commotion in the world beyond. These projections can prevent us from getting to the heart of the matter, knowing who we are and long to be, so that we might express that we might love what we find there that represents a spark of the divine, and what we find there that lays bare our humanness, our vulnerability, and our soft spots. For how can we truly love what we don't take the time to fully understand? Television shows and movies have played with that phenomenon of the voices or the characters in our head taking turns at our mind's control panel, so to speak. The first one that I remember was a sitcom called Herman's Head that came out my senior year of high school. Or more recently, you may remember Pixar's Inside Out. Herman's Head was about a young man and the four characters who lived in his head, who represented parts of him, but also the appetites and projections of society about what a man should want and be. They represented his sensitivity, his lust and hunger, his anxiety, and his intellect and logic. And I love that they crossed gender lines. And two characters made guest appearances, the voice and character of jealousy and the voice and character of God. Most of the episodes were about Herman learning how to sift between what the voices wanted and what he wanted and who he wanted to be. Inside Out is about a young girl who is coping with a big change in her life, moving from the Midwest to the West Coast. She's exactly my son's age, so of course this movie comes to mind this year. And the characters of voices of joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust all take turns at the control panel in headquarters. While we may have the same or different names for the voices competing with one another and collaborating together in our own headquarters, many can relate. We have different emotions and characters in sides to us. We are a different mixture of them at different times. We are never one of them alone. And please hear this. None of us, none of you, we are not who we are on our worst day, and we are not just who we are on our best day. We are human, we are holy, we are enough. We are capable of growth and change. We can do hard things. We can make beautiful contributions, but our worthiness is inherent before we do a thing. You are not what the voice of pride says you are. You are not who the voice of greed says you are. You are not who the voice of anger says you are, or the voice of shame, or the voice of pity. You are what the voices of love and compassion say you are if you take the time to listen and find out. Love helps lead to self-compassion, which allows us to see ourselves as we truly are and the circumstances we are in as they truly are. Dr. Kristin Neff writes a lot about the importance of self-compassion, which she describes as having three aspects: self-kindness, our connection to our universal humanity, and mindfulness. Self-kindness is the voice that counters self-judgment or self-esteem. You see, self-esteem often takes the approach of comparing yourself over and against others, and this can create a kind of self-confidence which is fragile. Understanding our connection to all of humanity allows us to witness that we are not alone in the times that we fall short. It prevents us from feeling isolated. It helps us to connect to the universal truth. It is human to make mistakes. We are imperfect. Mindfulness, that third aspect Kristin Neff teaches about, is the antidote to over-identification. Many were alone in the pandemic, and it was hard for everyone. Some could see that there was a time when they had more in-person and relational experiences, and some could feel that there would be such a time again. Some felt connected to all the others who were lonely and alone, the connection to humanity, to a universal experience of suffering. Others felt their aloneness, their suffering was totally unique and got lost at times in what felt so long that it might be permanent, and feeling so alone and so unique in that aloneness is much harder. That is not to say that we all had the same levels of ease and pain. We did not. Just to say that we are never completely alone and unique in what we face. Self-compassion helps us to see our strengths and weaknesses, our beauty and brokenness, our pain and our possibilities, our suffering and our joy in the light of the wider human experience. We don't wind up over-identifying with one aspect or another of ourselves or our experiences. Self-compassion is the innate quality that we have for care turned towards ourselves. It can be our companion through thick and thin. Self-esteem is fickle. As Ralph Waldo Emerson writes, to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. To be you with all your infinite possibilities and your finite flaws is a gift. One of the greatest gifts of spiritual practices such as prayer, meditation, yoga, a hike in the woods, a chat with a babbling brook, painting, journaling, and the like, is the chance to become reacquainted with ourselves. We don't have to wait for a pandemic for solitude. These practices can help us be. Loving yourself is about appreciating the mere fact of you are here, the mere fact of being. You are inherently worthy of love before you do anything. The following is an affirmation that I often share and that speaks to my heart. It is good to be. It is good to be here. It is so good to be here together. A pandemic brings to the forefront that right here, right now, that is the time that we have. So now is the time to be faithful to who you are and to what you long to have flourish in your life. Right now is the chance to move into right relationship with yourself, with your mental well-being, physical well-being, and spiritual well-being. What would that journey look like? Might it include forgiving yourself, practicing activities that improve physical or emotional strength, making the space for creativity and beauty to flow? Maybe a cold day like today with the right clothes is the perfect day to journey in the woods with yourself, with the voices in your head, and to cultivate your good friend, good neighbor voice, and to be present to your needs and hopes, to your suffering and possibilities. If you need help imagining what loving kindness looks like, there's a wonderful story that a parent shared on the internet about the wisdom that came from her 3-year-old. From her 3-year-old's maybe first friend, if you will. It is a bedtime story, and her parent overhears her say out loud, "Good night, myself. I love you." And then there's a pause, and she's still listening. The parent's listening outside, and then she says, "I love you too." Right there, the voice of God or the voice of her conscience made an appearance in her head. It is true. She is loved, and so are you. As Elizabeth Cady Stanton An Unitarian ancestor once said, "Nature never repeats herself, and the possibilities of one human soul will never be found in another." So again, now is the time, beloveds, to know yourself, to love yourself as fully as you know how. And from that source will spring the source of your compassion and love for the whole wide world. Amen, and may it be so. And now, in our going, may the light of love and self-compassion bless us and keep us. May it shine down upon us. May it radiate out from within us. May it grant us peace. For this is the day that you and I are given. So let us rejoice in it and be glad. Go in peace and with joy. Practice love again and again. Amen. And go and be the blessing you are in the world.